Hi, today's video I'm going to show you how to glaze with the new glazing medium. So I'm starting with 2 pages in my journal that I have gessoed. Gesso is important for glazing because we're going to need all of these layers of paint to kind of float around on the surface and interact with each other, and we really don't want them to soak into the page. Gesso is super important to my process. It's just something that I do on all my pages. It's how I get the art to look the way it looks, and I love it. So already gesso here, and then I'm going to further prep my page by adding a little texture with the texture paste. Ranger has a bunch of different pastes to choose from now. I'm just using the regular one. And I'm going to take a stencil, and with my palette knife I'm going to butter the bread through the stencil with the paste. I call it buttering the bread. You put the paste on the knife and then scrape it through, and you end up with a great dimensional texture. And this needs to dry completely before we glaze it. And I would recommend just letting it air dry. I wouldn't heat it, but I don't heat anything. So, maybe I'm not the best source for that information. But I tend to just let things air dry and do something else while this dries. So what I want there to be a variety of texture happening here that then I can do some cool glazing over. So this is one of my new stencils from the January show. And I need to have an odd number of elements because I like odd numbers, so do one more here. And I will definitely use a baby wipe to clean the stencil off, because if that dried like that, then it would, forever alter my stencil design. So that's not something that I want to happen. While I don't usually clean my stencils much, texture paste is an exception, and I do clean the texture paste off the stencil. Okay, so I'm going to clean that up. I'm going to let this dry, and then I'll be back to show you how to use the glazing medium. Okay, my texture paste is nice and dry here on my journal page. I've got my palette set here. I've got some magenta, some tangerine, some sterling, some umber, and a little tiny bit of red. And so I'm going to mix and match those colors throughout my background. And I'm going to add glazing medium to all of the paint colors. And glazing medium is just a medium that will, kind of like gel medium, but it is thinner, and it's going to keep the paints open longer. That just means it's going to make them stay wet longer. So if you ever make prints with acrylic and you're finding that your acrylic is drying on your jelly plate or on your plastic too fast, if you add a little glazing medium, then it will keep them wet longer. Also, if you just tend to like to really blend and work your layers and build up different effects, kind of faux finish effects, then glazing medium will really help you, because it will keep your paint wet longer, and you can build up those layers. And it's different than water in that it keeps the viscosity of the paint pretty similar. So it's not going to be watering the paint down, really. It's going to be extending it and making it stay wet without making it watery. So I'm going to add a little bit of glazing medium here to all of my paint colors there. And you can just use your palette knife or your brush to stir it in. I'm just going to use the end of a brush right now, only because that happens to be handy to me. And see how it's not watering my paint down? It's all of a sudden it's not a big, messy pool of water. Instead it's still the heavy body paint, a little softer than it used to be. I mean, it can't stay as hard as it used to be. It's softer, but it's not watery. This way it will retain its great pigment qualities as well, and it will just stay wet so much longer. And the advantage to this is those great faux finish type old world stucco looks that you can get that are just so cool. My umber paint is not a color that I necessarily use every day, but it's an essential color to me because I use it as my shadow color when I paint faces. So it's absolutely indispensable for my face painting. And it is also great if you ever want to vintage anything. If you think, oh, the colors are too bright, if you just give it a little wash of umber, it will instantly kind of vintage it. And the umber is a gray-brown, so it's not a really yellow brown, and so the gray-brown works really well with my palette. Okay, so there is my paint with the glazing medium mixed in. And again, drying time is going to vary depending on where you live, but what it will definitely do is keep that paint wet longer than normal. So I'm going to move the palette away so I can move my journal over. And I'm going to paint. So I did choose colors that are not going to turn super muddy. Don't want mud. I want beautiful layers. So I start with a kind of a mid-tone of a color, and I'm going to paint it right on my page. And that paint is going to just spread like butter over the gesso. And you want your paint to get in all those nooks and crannies of that texture paste. And so what I kind of call glazing is the wax on, wax off technique. You're going to put a little paint on, and then we're going to remove it. And that gives you that old world stucco look. It's kind of like back when faux finishing was really popular for walls, and you would pay big money, or you would use your time and money to add glazes to your walls. We're just doing the same thing. We're just putting glazes on our pages, and it just gives a really interesting look. Okay, so coated my glazing medium on there, and what's nice is that glazing medium is helping my paint stay wet, so I can really, really work and get this great texture into there. So now I'm just going to grab a baby wipe, and I'm going to, what I call, work the paint. I'm barely rubbing. You know, if I come along and rub hard like this, goodbye all my paint. I don't want all the paint to go. So it's kind of a little fine dance, but what you do is you gently rub, especially over the texture paste. You gently rub the paint off the top of the paste while maintaining the paint down in the nooks and crannies. Oh, look at that. And you know, you can get this look with regular paint if you work fast, but what you can't do is keep building wet layers into wet layers without the glazing medium. So it just slows that paint down. Just think of it as an extender. It just slows that paint down. Now I've moved to my fingers so that I can kind of blend. And I'm just getting wonderful accumulation of the paint in and around that texture paste area. That's what I want. I can also see areas in my gesso that I've brushed. I can see areas that I've screwed up. So now I'm going to add a little red with my finger now. And I'm going to add the dark colors where? Right near the texture paste. I don't want it to be dark all over my background. That's just not a Dina thing, really. But I want there to be some highlights and lowlights in the texture. So a little bit of red in the texture. And this layer, look, I can still stir it up because that glazing medium makes it so that I can keep stirring it. And it's just hard to explain unless you've tried it, because you know I'd love for you just to get a bottle of the glazing medium or a little tube. It comes in a tube and a jar, and play with it and see. It really does make your paint feel different. If you're a printer and you like to do a lot of printing, I want you to mix it with your paint before you apply it to your printing surface, and it will just help your paint stay open. If you like to draw on your plate, or do a lot of different manipulation of the medium on your plate, the glazing medium will really help you. Okay, and that is just looking like a sunset. Isn't it looking gorgeous? And you can see the accumulation of the paint deep inside the texture areas, okay? And then you want some areas to be light, so I'm purposely keeping it light here so that I've got a contrast with the dark. Again, I'm keeping it light and dark. You want lots of contrast there. Should we add a little umber as well? So the umber I add in a similar way to the red. I'm not going to umberize the whole thing, but I'm going to maybe do edges. So at this point, I'm just putting it on with my finger. See how it just gives it a great old world look? Glazing for me is a harken back to when I first started art journaling. So I started art journaling in 2007. No. I started art journaling in 2004. And I started teaching a lot in 2000. I started teaching a lot in 2007. So 2004 is when I started art journaling. And I just was addicted to glazing. I glazed everything. I glazed over tissue. So glue tissue down on your work and then let it dry, make it bumpy. And then I would get glazes in all the lumps and bumps of that tissue. Oh, I think I did probably 5 journals full of glazed tissue. I was totally addicted to it. Now, see how I'm working those wet layers? I can still stir them up. And the umber adds such a difference. It's not making my page brown. But what it is doing is it's adding, again, that depth, that visual depth that I'm looking for. And the glaze just is helping it not dry instantly as I go. Super easy. And it creates such a cool piece. In fact, this, if you did the hearts in a certain way on a canvas or something like that, this could be a finished piece. If you added a quote now, I've got great variety of color. I've got lights and darks. Add a quote, add your journaling, pour your soul out on that page, and you could be done. So that's a simple way to use the glazing medium. I hope you try it. I can't wait to see what you make with it.